there's an ambition to achieve something, but it hasn't been completely crystallized. Well, there was a new project being started up, um, and I was always interested in working on the EverQuest franchise. I've
Mm.
been working on sci-fi for some time,
As an old school EverQuest player. Yeah.
of course. And they were talking about some really ambitious, big ideas. And so I wanted to be part of that. They were talking about a voxel destructible world, having NPC factions being able to be like moved in and out of areas, using AI in the background to like beat back the orcs, but then the orcs steadily start making a comeback, and it's all very ambitious, big idea stuff, pie in the sky.
Yeah. Sounds like it.
But so the project was called initially EverQuest Next, which is for some reason some of the sort of the code name they used for a lot of their let's work on a sequel or a spin-off that's not exactly a sequel.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, and so yeah, so we started working on it, and the technology was being developed at the time, and there was a lot of questions like, how do you build a giant massive voxel world? Do we have the tools to build that? Like in Minecraft, you hit generate, it generates this random procedural world,
Mhm.
but that doesn't always necessarily mean you're going to have interesting arrangement and placement, right? I mean,
Right.
in a game of EverQuest, certain things have to be always be there in certain locations.
Yeah, you don't want it to be completely randomized 'cause that's
Yeah,
unplayable and uninteresting.
right. And completely randomized doesn't always look pretty.
Mhm.
I mean, you have to look at a game like No Man's Sky to see, wow, there's a lot of gorgeous planets, and then there's a few planets where you're like, variables that got thrown in the pot and and mixed together are not very pleasing.
Mhm. Came out kinda
So
bland or harsh.
yeah, exactly. So you can't go 100% procedural. So we were trying to find the way to find that balance between curated content, procedural content, and fan made content, because we wanted to engage the community with a game that was mutable like that.
Those are big goals. I didn't know that project had such lofty, aspirations.
Mhm.
Um, so how did working on that go? Obviously, the game never got to a consumer audience.
Yeah, so I mean, though it had its own difficulties internally, but there was also the limitations of the technology and the amount of time it would take to create the technology needed.
Mhm.
So EverQuest Next became EverQuest Landmark, and Landmark became sort of an intermediary project that would engage the community to help them create content and kind of test the tools so that we could crowdsource, sort of QA the stuff, and also get people building and tell us what would make
Okay.
their building experience better.
That's super progressive. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a heavily community-driven game, community interaction. We had web streams where we would showcase community builds, and some of the stuff you see on my portfolio are awards that I created to give to people in the community based on themed builds. So whenever we
That's
created a
cool.
new kit, let's say the ogre kit, we had the ogre models and we knew what they were going to look like, and we had concept art for their civilization. And we would like me and the other artists would sit down, we'd build out some voxel materials and some props, and we'd hand them to the users and say, what do you guys think? What can you create out of this? And we wanted to see like if their stuff was kind of samey, we needed to add more stuff to it,
Mhm.
you know? And that allowed us to keep moving forward and building new stuff while the community kind of, chewed on stuff, and they could see if it was fun or underwhelming. And man, the stuff the community built always knocked our socks off. They were
Hmm.
just so talented,
Yeah.
so creative.
It's hard to match the passion of invested gamers, right?
Yeah. And then, you know, part of the goal, as I've said in the past, was that the people who had the most elaborate, best builds, you could basically select a cube around the build and then create a blueprint out of it.
Mhm.
And you could then place that. So people were selling those on the marketplace in the game. So they could sell their build for a dungeon, for a castle, for an interesting minecart,
Huh.
and they would share them. But the ones that got the best, we were going to actually use as part of the cities that the NPCs would live in.
Uh-huh.
And maybe we could find, and we were planning to put some way to say this design was built by this gamer,
Mhm.
because we really wanted to involve the community as we were making the game
That's
world.
cool.
So all like the rest of the town would be built by our us devs, but there'd be one or two houses, or maybe three houses, first, second, and third, that would be built by the fans that were in that town.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. As,
And
like,
then that was
community
the plan.
showcases. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And because we didn't want to abuse the community's investment in the game or use them as free labor. It
Mhm.
was always going to be on us, but we definitely wanted to thank them for their engagement and their passion.
Yeah, I can imagine that's quite a line to ride when you're giving the community so much agency and there's so much ability to just take what they've built and make it part of your world, to give them a tribute, but not to give the appearance of, "Build our game for us."
Right.
Uh-huh. Hmm,
And
interesting.
yeah, so I mean that went along. It also faced some road bumps similar to what I described on Ghost, where as the tool kind of took on a life of its own, they weren't sure if they should be making Landmark as a creative build game like Minecraft, or
Mhm.
if it needs to be a survival game that has an economy of its own and a marketplace and adventure and scripted events.
Okay.
And so there were two camps. They were like, look, we're helping test the tool so we can make EverQuest Next. And the other one's like, well, we want to keep people engaged. Let's add in new monsters and let's add in new
Ah,
scripting tech and AI and pathing. And we're like, well, we're taking development time from, pile A and putting it into pile B. There's only so much dev time to go around.
right.
And yeah, so I mean, it made some fantastic stuff, but ultimately it they didn't want to persist putting money into it, not where we couldn't see a clear end to it.
Yeah. That's a shame. It's a very interesting development story
Mhm.
where there's such openness to community collaboration. It's almost like it actually took away from having a defined enough vision to push for and to actually make a compelling business case.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with game dev, is I've been on projects where the plan has a very clear vision from the get-go
Uh-huh.
and it's executed. And it's driven by a charismatic lead. On World of Warcraft, it was Chris Metzen. Him and
Mhm.
Sammy, they were in the meetings, they were joking around, like without just as an anecdote, whenever there was a new zone for me to work on, we would get together with the designers, and Chris was there on front of a whiteboard, and Chris would just basically look over the synopsis of the zone, and he'd like do his pitch to us. And
Uh-huh.
he was like full of energy, and he was cracking us up. He was hilarious. He was
Uh-huh.
like, "All right, so these night elves are here, and they're just rocking out, and they're just like chilling, like cider and stuff, and then these orcs are rolling in, and they're like, we need this lumber to build war machines." And then the elves are like, it's like, screw you guys. Okay, so
Uh-huh.
there's conflict over there. They're trying to kill the trees, but then the elves are just totally going to be summoning this thing over here to knock those orcs on their asses.
Uh,
And he's just like, yeah, it was just really funny watching how animated he was describing all
yeah,
this.
it sounds just like Betson too, not a bad impression.
It's Metzen. Metzen is like, Metzen is awesome because he's got the voice of like a like a
Uh-huh.
badass, like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a motorcycle gangster,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he's like the nicest, super nicest, professional, sweetest guy you'll ever meet.
Uh-huh.
Very friendly, like no ego whatsoever. Really great guy.
Uh,
And Sammy is like a constant smile on his face. He just wants to draw and do fun stuff, and
uh-huh.
he like plays D&D, and just he's just such a great. Oh man, all the Blizzard guys were just amazing.
That's awesome. What a great picture that paints in my head. Um,
So that was a segue, but what I was getting at is sometimes you have a clear vision with a charismatic lead, like PlanetSide 2 had
okay.
Higby and Trammell.
Yeah.
They had a very clear vision of what they wanted, especially Higby.
Yeah.
Um, and then you have games where there's an ambition to achieve something, but it hasn't been completely crystallized.
Okay.
And so at some point you have to like put boots to the ground and say, well, there's some questions we can't answer until we see what technology we have, until we see how
Hmm.
it plays. We need the
Okay.
prototype or a
It's
vertical
left open a
slice.
little bit.
Yeah. And in some cases they're like, well, we need to create what's called a vertical slice, which is like a tiny piece of the bigger game that
Mhm.
we can experience if it's fun or not.
Yeah, it has all the stuff that's gonna be central to it.
Right. And sometimes those sort of projects can lose their way or gets derailed by other things that happen
Mhm.
or personalities on the team that come
Mhm.
in conflict.
Mhm.
Um, but you can never tell. Sometimes those things also just crystallize during development and everything works out. Clone Wars Adventures, we came into it with a very kind of loose vision of what we wanted, but that crystallized during development and there were no road bumps.
Hmm.
And we delivered a really fun package. In fact, I am contacted still on ArtStation by fans of the game asking me how I did certain art for certain things because they're trying to copy the art style, or
Huh.
they give me these impassioned anecdotes of times they played it when they were a kid. And I love that.
That's awesome, man. That's gotta keep you going when you get those.
Oh, yeah. I love it. Um, and
So Clone
yeah,
Wars
so
is an
that's kind of
example of a game that came together without having a charismatic leader with a defined vision right out front. I guess
right.
from what you told me about the game, and I'm just learning it from you, that it's kind of based on having like a hub with mini games and stuff. That kind of makes sense. It seems like
Yeah.
it's a very like wheel with spokes kind of design, and
Mhm.
um and I guess the question I want to ask you, and you don't have to answer this, is can you give me an example of a game that I guess Landmark then coming back is an example of the game where that didn't go well.
Yeah, and there was more I mean, there was a lot of factors. There was, some ambitions that were different between the personalities on the team. There
Mhm.
was technology that was promised but never manifested.
Okay.
There was, limitations that became apparent only once the technology had been made.
Uh-huh.
Like, when you have this really high resolution mutable world and people are constantly manipulating the terrain, that's a lot of data being sent up and downstream,
Okay.
and keeping that synced for everyone standing around watching it before it starts getting choppy
Yeah.
is hard to figure out.
Yep. That makes sense. 'Cause, yeah, character synchronization is a big thing in interpolation and stuff like that, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know a lot about this stuff. I have a layperson's understanding, but if the whole world can be muted and, um, so at any given point when you're in a 3D game, you're not rendering and seeing the whole world, right? You're seeing the
right.
part of it that matters to you. So whenever you travel, you would have to re-download what all the changes that happened since the last time you were there, right?
Exactly, and that's expensive for paying for the servers to send all
Mhm.
that data through. As the company running it, like, we're sending all that data to people,
Hmm.
so we're paying for that,
You don't
and
think
then the
about server
more
bandwidth costs being a limiting
yeah,
factor, but it
it
makes
became a
sense.
reality for a game like that. So yeah, the game kind of unfortunately, dissolved,
Mm.
and then development ceased. There were a lot of fans who reached out, people who really enjoyed playing that game. Fantastic creative people who, in fact, some of the artists that we worked with, some of the community members, they've still taken that original vision and are running with it. Um, I can't remember his ID on Twitter, but one of the artists that was really passionate about the game is still trying to remake the game in Unity.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so the dream, keeping it alive.